Hey everyone, thank you for attending this Empower breakout session, and thank you all for being so accommodating with this remote stuff. It's new for us too, but we're excited to be able to show you what's coming and show you hopefully a couple new tricks that you can take home with you and implement in your own apps today. Now we're going to be talking about how to trend your data using pipelines and the brand new RESTful API that Harrison talked about earlier today. And just a quick heads up before we get started, I want to let you know that the session is being recorded, including the chat and the Q&A session at the very end. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. My name's Ryan Murray. I'm a product manager at QuickBase. I've been at the base for a little over 5 years now. Started off in customer support, and then after about a year in, I started developing QuickBase apps for QuickBase before moving into the product management org. So what you're going to learn today is something that I've been using, a technique that I've used when I was developing QuickBase apps. So happy to pass on some of that knowledge. Now, as we get going, me and my colleagues are going to be available throughout the presentation for any questions that you have about what we're talking about in the moment, or if you just want to say hey. And again, we do have live Q&A at the very end too. So yeah, don't be shy with your questions. Also wanted to give you a quick reminder to review this session. We're going to post a link in the chat. This sort of helps us determine the content for next year. So if you found this was really valuable, let us know. If it wasn't valuable at all, let us know. Really no hard feelings. So let's just get into this. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. Here's the agenda for today. So I want to go over first the problem that we're going to solve. Then talk a little bit about how you can use QuickBase to implement a data structure that's conducive to trend reporting. Then we're going to do a quick overview of the new RESTful API before we put all the concepts together with pipelines. All right, so let's get into it. We're going to first try to answer two questions. One is what problem are we solving? And the other is how we're going to solve it. So the problem that we're solving in QuickBase today, I think can really be summed up in a couple of questions. You may have asked yourself, or you may have thought to yourself, have you ever really wanted to maybe import a summary report into a QuickBase table? You might be looking at, a summary report and see, hey, these columns and these rows would be really helpful if I could sort of flatten them out. What about, trying to build a report to show how your data changes day over day? I'm sure some of you have tried to do this, maybe successfully, or maybe haven't been successful at all. And some people think that, hey, this might be a QuickBase reporting problem, or QuickBase just wasn't designed to do this. But what we're really going to learn today is how you can structure your application to allow you to trend your data day over day. So what we're going to do today is take a summary report that looks a lot like this. We're going to learn how to flatten these records into a new table that looks something like this. And this is going to allow us to build beautiful reports that end up looking like this. So let's get into the use case that we're going to use today. We're going to be asked, or we were asked to trend some sales data. So Scott Michaels, he's our regional manager. He wants to show his CFO how quickly opportunities and opportunity dollars move through the pipeline. He wants to see this report in QuickBase to show, how his data is changing day over day, so he can prove to the CFO that his branch is in fact profitable. So that sort of wraps up the what that we're solving. Now let's get into how we're actually going to solve it. So we have three players in our crew here today. We have QuickBase, which is really the brains of the operation. We're going to build a summary report in QuickBase and a brand new table to help us trend this data. Then we're going to use the RESTful API, and in particular the reports endpoint, to gather the summarized data before we move on to pipelines to tie these two concepts together and actually do the magic. All right, so let's get into QuickBase. So I always thought, back when I was developing QuickBase apps for QuickBase, it's really important to ask yourself before you start building anything, 3 questions. One is what? So what are we actually trending here? You saw from that email sent from the CFO, hey, we want to trend opportunity dollars and the number of opportunities by each status day over day. Also, that sort of answers our second question. How frequently are we going to snapshot the data? Are we going to, sort of take a picture every night, once a month, once a week, or even every hour with pipelines? We can snap this. And then probably the most important question is why? Why are we doing this? You guys are, have a lot on your plates as QuickBase builders. I'm sure you get requests flying into your inbox, every 15 minutes or so. So it's really important to make sure that, you're working on the things that are most important. Now, what we hope to do today is teach you a really easy way to build these awesome trend reports. So hopefully you can start saying yes to these questions more often. All right, so let's get into QuickBase and look at what we're going to need. So in QuickBase, we're first going to need a summary report that contains the data that we want to trend. So you can see over here in the screenshot on the left, we have a summary report that groups our opportunities by opportunity status and counts the number of opportunities in each status and totals the field forecasted fees. Then we're going to need to create a brand new table in our application. And inside that table, we're going to have a field for each data point we want to trend. So let's get into QuickBase and start building. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is check out my summary report in QuickBase. We're going to pop into the opportunities table and open up our summary opportunities by status trend report. So here we see, yep, this is grouped by our opportunity status, and we're counting the number of opportunities and the total forecasted fees. Now, I want to keep this up in another tab so I can refer back to it while we create a new sandbox and do our building here. So first thing I'm going to do is name the sandbox. We're going to call it the Opportunity Trends Sandbox, and I'm going to bring over all the records. Whether you do that or not is up to you. And now that we're in the sandbox, we can go ahead and create our new table. So I'm going to call this the Opportunity Trend Table, and a single record is going to be called a trend. And now I'm going to spend way too long looking for that perfect table icon, one that gives my users something to draw to. All right, there it is. That should work for us. And now that we have our table up and going, we can start adding our fields. So remember, we want a field for each metric that we want to trend. So for O1, new opportunity, we need to count the number of opportunities, and we also need to count the total forecasted fees. So I'm going to count here first O1 number of ops, and this is going to be a numeric field. And here's O1 opportunity dollars. And it's always so hard to type when people are watching you. All right, here's O2. Nope, not 02, O2, O2, number of ops. Also numeric, and O2 dash, opportunity dollars. I'm going to save you guys from watching me type and mistype. So we're going to speed this up a little bit. We're going to, actually you can see I kind of made a little bit of a mistake here. It should probably be numeric currency fields for our dollars. So we can just come back and fix those as we're moving. It's currency now. And we just need to add one more, our lost dollars. Great. So now that we have our table, we're going to publish. And I absolutely love this about Sandbox. It gives us a nice summarized view of what changes were made. And we can sort of cross-check this to make sure we have everything. We have O1 through O4, we have won, we have dead, we have lost. Now that I've double-checked everything, we're going to go ahead and publish these changes and delete the sandbox. Awesome. So that's really all the work that we need to do in QuickBase. Now let's move over to the RESTful API. Like you saw Harrison in the keynote earlier today, talk about the API. I think it might be a good idea just to give us a little bit of, or give you guys a little bit of an overview as to the problems that you can solve with this new API. Now here's our sort of human readable documentation. We're really, really excited about this. And in the API, we give you guys a lot of new endpoints to explore and use. You can see over here we have applications. You can get information about an app. You can also create tables, update tables. You can create new fields or delete fields, so do some schema actions. You can also insert and update records. But what we're going to be looking at today is this guy right here. We're going to run a report in QuickBase. So let's take a look at this, at what this sort of API endpoint is looking for. My absolute favorite part about this area of the product is the fact that we now allow you to make sample requests to give you guys an idea of the data that's going to come back whenever you ask the API for some information. So you can see here, we can just sort of plug and play in our path parameters and our query parameters. First, we have our report ID. So this comes from our QuickBase table. We also need to specify the table ID. So, what table does QuickBase need to look at? And here we have path parameters. So the path in the URL looks a lot like this. So we have our V1, this is in the path. Our reports are in the path. And then we also want the report ID 33 before we get to our query parameters, which is everything that happens after this question mark. So this is pretty similar. We can draw parallel in QuickBase. You might have your realm.quickbase.com/db. That's in the URL path. Then your DB ID also in the URL path before you get into your question mark A, which is our action in the query parameter, which could be TD or DR or is some API endpoint. So that's the report ID we're going to be using in the path. The query parameters is going to be our table ID. Now you can skip records or only get a certain number of records, the top 5, the top 10, the top 20. But we're not going to be using this for our purpose, but you may sort of extend this to a use case that you have in mind already. If it's not trending sales data, it could be tracking project statuses or anything that you can sort of take home in your application. So let's go ahead and start plugging these parameters in. So in QuickBase, I'm going to go ahead and copy the QID and the DBID to the clipboard, and we're going to paste them into the API portal over here to get a sample. Now, in our headers, we want to put in our Realm hostname. So for us, it's team.quickbase.com, our user agent, and our authorization. So we're going to be using a QuickBase user token, and I pasted that into the auth, and we're going to go ahead and run this and check out the response. So this is how a summary report looks in the new API guide or the new API portal. This was something, again, super exciting. You couldn't do this with the existing API or API do query. You were pretty limited to only pulling table reports. But now we can use the new API to leverage QuickBase's brain and summarization capabilities to give us and flatten out the QuickBase, the summary report data for us. So now that we have our sample response, we can start looking at how we want to use this in QuickBase. So I want to take just a quick look at the response itself and draw some parallels to the summary report that you guys are familiar with looking at in QuickBase. So you'll notice that all of the values here are nested under this data object. So we have in our first column here, we have our O1 new opportunity. That's our value. And in this column here, we can see that, hey, the 7 maps to our number of opportunities. And here is our forecasted monthly fees. Now, guys, again, we are using QuickBase's brain to do all of this summarization for us. And in the old world, back before we had an endpoint like this, what I would have to do is actually query all of these records sort of individually. So go get a table report that contained all of these records, and then do the transformation myself manually. So go and loop through each one of these records, add it to a variable, and increment it, by the number of opportunities that I find and whatever status, and the forecasted fees that I find in whatever status. So you can see here we have our O1 new opportunity that maps over to our first sort of column that's present in our summary report. We have our 7 over here, which is the value that's nested under our column that's labeled 3, and our forecasted fees are right over here. So that is the RESTful API. Again, a really new, powerful capability that we're excited to bring to QuickBase. And now let's talk about how we're going to tie all of this together with pipelines. So I have gone ahead and started creating a pipeline already. We're going to go ahead and name this the Opportunity Trend Pipeline. And we're going to add our first step. I'm going to go into my starred channels, which I find is a little easier to manage than going through the whole list. And we're going to be using the JSON handler. Now, the JSON handler essentially allows you to go and go to a URL or stream data from a URL in JSON format. So we're going to fetch JSON from the new API portal that we just looked at. So let's go sort of field by field here in pipelines and talk about sort of what each one means, starting with our authentication. So depending on what system you're using, you could use different authentication methods, but we want to use QuickBase user token since we have called that out here in our guide. Now for the method request type, we're going to be using post because that was what was sort of stated at the very top of the API guide. I don't know if you guys caught that. But at the very top, there was a URL, our sample URL, and we're going to be using the post function. And now let's move on to the next phase, which is our headers. So down here, we have our headers. This is our realm host name. So again, we use team.quickbase.com. We also have our user agent. So this is what tells QuickBase, the platform, sort of the name of your integration. So I've called this our opportunity trend pipe. And if you had created a pipeline that's sort of running wild or is taking a long time to run, and we're alerted to this sort of slow running pipeline or process or integration, this user agent gives us some information to relay to you. So you'd want to name this something that makes sense to the integration that you have stood up. So, if that summary report that I ran was, causing some performance issues, Care and maybe Richie on our care team would reach out to me and say, hey, Ryan, looks like the request you're making with the user agent of Opportunity Trend Pipe is taking a little while. Can you, refactor this and make it a little more performant? And then we have our authorization, which we capture in a header in the API guide or in the API portal. But on the pipeline side, we use our own sort of authentication schema of the QuickBase user token. So now that we have our headers sort of copied to our clipboard, we're going to go ahead and paste these into the header field in QuickBase. These are our headers again. So we're going to go ahead and copy those and move on over to pasting them into pipelines. So I'm going to go ahead and grab our realm host name and our opportunity trend pipe and paste these guys in. All right, so here's our QB realm host name. And one thing, guys, I'm using a clipboard manager here called Clip Menu, which essentially allows me to copy a bunch of things at once without having to go back and forth. It gives me a little bit of a history that I can go and play with. Highly recommend this. I found this to be almost as useful as QuickBase in my old role and even in my current role. Super useful. So now that we've pasted our headers in here, we can look at sort of the rest of this fetch JSON request. So this first one is the request body, and we don't necessarily need a body for our endpoint here for the runner report, but if you were doing like an insert or an update record JSON request, you would want to make sure that you're pasting in, a sample. So here we would be pasting in the body of our request into, this DBID, field 6 is getting the value, this is my test. Field 7 is getting the value 10, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see over here, guys, if you notice the sample API on the right-hand side that you can run and test, we did not have this body parameter for the API or the URL endpoint that we were hitting. So now that we've sort of taken a look at, we don't necessarily need the body, we can sort of keep going here. We don't need the username or the password. But we have our QuickBase user token, which I'm going to paste in here. And then we're going to go to the JSON URL. Now, this JSON URL comes from our QuickBase API guide. And you can see that at the top of our request here. So now that I've gotten my JSON URL, I'm going to move on to the next step here, which is actually iterating over the JSON. So after we've pasted in the URL, we added another step, step B here, to iterate over the records. And what this does is just gives pipelines a chance to read the data from the previous request into memory so that we can use it in subsequent steps. So here you can see pipelines is helping me out a little bit with the JSON handler. It knows that I have JSON already. A JSON object in a prior step, so it's filled that in. And we don't need to give a schema sample or a record path since we're going to be using some object notation to access these fields directly in pipelines. So pipelines, again, also try to help out here by inserting a for each loop for us. But we don't necessarily need this. We're going to be adding one record for one record every day, and we're going to be adding our sort of fields into the field values from our summary report into these fields. So now I'm going to create a QuickBase record, and we're going to pull in our opportunity trend table. And then we're going to tell pipelines what fields we're going to be filling in. So if you'll remember the fields that we created about 20 minutes ago, we're going to pull in all of them here. So our O1 total, our $01, O2 total, $02, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you all could add a date field to your QuickBase table, but in this instance, I'm just using the date created to build the reports, but it's up to you. So now that we have our fields all sort of initialized on the QuickBase pipeline side, we're going to learn how to parse the JSON response from the API call that we had made previously and access those pieces of information. So the value 7, the value, $5,230, and we're going to learn how to plug those values from our summary report into QuickBase fields. And I do want to give you all a heads up. It's going to get a little tedious. We're going to go really, really slowly and break down the pill or the sort of placeholder value that we're going to need to insert into pipelines. We're going to go, again, slowly. We're going to break it down sort of step by step. And just like that, that first QuickBase case statement or if statement was a little tricky, this might seem foreign and scary to you initially, but I promise that once you sort of learn how to use the pattern, it's going to get very easy, and you can extend and repeat this in other areas of your QuickBase application suite. So let's take a look at what we're going to be using. This is sort of our template. And again, this is going to be available to all of you after the conference. So you can copy this string here and just change the bits and pieces that make sense for your pipeline and application. So let's go sort of step by step as to what this is actually telling us. I know it might look a little like gobbledygook now, but we're going to try to make sense of this. So let's start at the very beginning. Now, we want to sort of compare this to the response that's coming back from pipelines. So let's look at the first option here. So first thing that we notice here is B. And this B pretty clearly refers to the step in pipelines. So we're referencing step B from our pipeline. Now we want to look at the next option here, which is the 0. Now, this is a sort of a byproduct or a notion of object-oriented programming. This is 0 index. So what this is saying essentially is in the response from our step B, I want you to look at the 0th object in that response. And now this pipelines, I should say, is 0 indexed, which essentially just means that it starts counting things at 0 instead of 1. Now, you've probably run into this already in QuickBase. If you've ever used the toDayOfWeek function on a date field, you know that Sunday, if that date field is on a Sunday or that date value is on a Sunday, it's going to return 0. So similarly, this is essentially just looking at the first thing in the B response. And what we're saying is inside of that first thing pipelines, I want you to look at the raw record. And that raw record we can see in our output right over here. So just to recap, hey pipelines, go look at step B. And if you're using this, maybe you're building sort of a larger pipeline that has many, many, many steps, you might change that B to a C or a D or an X or a Q or whatever makes sense. So if pipelines, go look, in our case, at step B. In B, I want you to stop at the first object that you see, and inside of that first object, there's going to be something called raw record. Now let's move on to sort of the second half of this. So inside of raw record pipelines, there is an object called data. And we can see that data marker up here in our API response. Okay, so inside of data, I want you to go to the 0th point, and remember, it's 0 index, so this object here, our first row in pipeline, or in our summary report, is 0, so here's our O1 new opportunity, our O2 is 1, our O3 is 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So go look at that first object nested inside the data object, that's right here, and I want you to pull the field or the object named 3. And that's located right here. And that references the column in our summary report, the number of opportunities. Now, inside of that sort of object named 3, there, I want you to go get me the value. And the value in this case is 7. Okay, let's do another example. Let's look at our 5237. Let's get the total forecasted fees for O1 new opportunity. So again, pipelines. You'll notice that we just changed that 3 to a 4. So pipelines, I want you to go look at the data object. Inside this data object, I want you to look at the first thing that you find, and that's our first object, the O1 new opportunity. Go look at the object named 4, and you'll notice here that there's a little bit of a difference between our index, which is 0. There are no quotes around our index. And then we have an object named 4, and you'll see there are quotes around that. Very similar to how in a formula URL, you might use the function dbid, and then an ampersand and with a string following it in quotes of your actual dbid. So the literal text versus sort of a marker. And in this case, our literal text is inside of quotation marks, and that references the object that's named 4, not the 4th object it's returned in our first object. Now, again, look inside of the object named 4, that's our forecasted fees, and we'll get our value, which is 5237. Let's do one more of these. Let's look at our O2 qualified opportunity. You'll notice here, we're again still looking in that data object, but instead of looking at the 0th object contained there, We're looking at our first object down here. I want you to look at the object named 3, which is our number of opportunities, and go get me the value, which is contained right there. We'll do one more. Again, hey pipelines, go look in our data object. It's over here. Go look at the second or the 1th object nested there, which is our O2 qualified opportunity. Inside of that, there's an object named 4. That's our forecasted fees. Go get me the value. The value is 1,080. Okay, a lot to take in, but again, we're just sort of plugging in different variables into this string here. Now let's go sort of step by step and do this inside of pipelines. So, okay, inside our O1, our number of ops. Let's take a look at our API guide over here. We want to pull in the value. So we want that 7 to be pulled into our O1 number of ops field. So we're going to double bracket this and look at step B. Go look at the first thing that you see in step B. There's going to be something called raw record over here. Inside of raw record, there's an object called data. Go look inside of that. And I want you to look at the first thing that you see. Inside the first thing you see, there's another thing. It's called 3. And inside of 3, I want you to get me the value. That's going to return 7. So that's how we're going to write 7 into O1 number of ops. Now let's do a few more of these. So here, again, we have our O1 number of ops. There's our value. We're going to copy this. And we're just going to paste again. So here's our O2, or I'm sorry, O1 dollars. So we just need to change this 3 from a 3 to a 4. So we're just going to move that 3 to a 4. And we're just going to move on to the next one, our O2 number of ops. Start with that same template, our pasted value, but instead of the 0 with object, I want our 0, 1, our first object, or what Pipelines thinks is the first object. All right, we're going to change that marker from a 0 to a 1. We're going to leave 3 as is because we're counting the number of ops. And here we go to O2. Again, we're looking at the 1th object, or the first object, and we're going to change that 3 to a 4. Same with number 3. We're going to go 0, 1, 2 is our O3 pipeline. So we know that we need to look at the second indexed here. We're going to use 3. We're going to change that 2 to a 4. And we're just going to cruise through. I think we're getting the hang of it now. So we'll speed this up just a little bit. You might have to go back and start counting. Just remember to count from 0 and not 1, or else pipelines will get a little confused. And we have our dead number of ops and our lost number of ops. Okay, that was a lot, a lot to take in, but we've now filled out all sort of 14 fields that we wanted present in our trend report. The only thing left to do here is to schedule it. Now remember, going back to our requirements, we wanted to schedule this every day, and we probably want to do it after hours. So I'm going to do this. You'll notice our time zone here is UTC. So I'm in Boston. And we are UTC -5. So I want to run this at, let's say, 8:23 at night, which would sort of roughly translate to 1:23 UTC. All right, so we can wait until 8 at night, but I know you guys aren't that patient. So we're going to just go ahead and try to run this, and it's going to run perfectly. Nope. All right, this is a little embarrassing. Pipeline told us we have an error, but luckily it gave us what the error was. So looks like we have an invalid header. Now that looks correct to me. It's team.quickbase.com, but let's see if Pipelines can give us a little more insight here. Oh, look at that. Turns out we're probably just missing a semicolon there. All right, real moment of truth here. We're going to pretend that never happened, and we're going to run this again and see what happens. So let's see. We went ahead. I love that Pipeline sort of goes through and tells us what exactly is happening. So, all right, it went and got our response. It read it into memory, and all right, I don't know about you guys, but it looks like we created a record. Let's check. Go over to our opportunity trend, and look at that. We did it. I know it took a little while. It was a lot to take in, but I think you guys all deserve sort of a round of applause for sticking with us. That was, again, a lot to take in, but let's now look at the most important factor, because again, our CFO is not necessarily going to care, about how we did it. He's going to care about the what. He wants to see the trend report. So let's pop into our opportunity trend table. I have sort of a baked turkey here already, and create a new chart so we can sort of show him how this data is trending. We're going to go ahead and name it the trend report. We're going to pull in our line and bar, and here's our date. Okay, here's our 01. And again, so now that we're sort of summing these, we're going to be adding a new axis for each field that we've decided to trend. So we'll do 01, 02, 03, 04, and how about 1 also? And then in our bar, let's see, sort of how these reflect as sort of percentages of our total sort of trend here. And go ahead and save this. And voila, look at that, isn't that gorgeous? We see all of our one opportunity sort of day over day. Look at that, at the very beginning of the month, we're trending up, and we have 03, so we know that our opportunities are sort of advancing through the pipeline. Again, it was it may have felt like a lot of work just to get here, but if you look at, sort of what the alternatives were before we were able to query a summary report or get the values, the raw values from a summary report, it would take a lot of work. And I think I remember sort of hacking something together with bubblegum and duct tape using, a summary table with perhaps a reverse relationship and an automation to import the summarized table into a date field. And it's just, a lot of work. So now that we have pipelines and we have the ability to leverage QuickBase's brain and the API to do all of our summarization and calculations, we've turned that, crazy sort of Rube Goldberg machine into a really sort of simple 3-step process. Now we went ahead and we grabbed, we built our summary report and our trending table in QuickBase. Then we used the RESTful API to go get the values directly from that summary report before tying all of that together with pipelines. So again, that sort of concludes our session here. We're going to move to open question and answer. But before we do that, just a reminder to review this session. We're going to post the link in the chat right now. Give us some feedback. I hope that you guys learned a lot. I certainly had fun teaching you guys, and I'm happy to move on to the next portion here, which is our Q&A. And again, don't forget to review the session. Thanks.